The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, Impact of Gaza War on the Radicalization of Muslim Populations in Non-Islamic Countries. The war between Israel and Hamas has caused immense human suffering. Along with its appalling humanitarian cost, there have been significant security repercussions stretching far beyond the Middle East. What has been the impact of the conflict on the wider world, particularly on Muslim populations in non-Islamic countries? Has it pushed more people towards radicalization, and how high is the risk? Is this further fueled by online conversations? And how do the effects of this conflict compare with the impact of previous wars in Iraq, Afghanistan and Syria? To consider these and other questions, tune into our live online discussion.
Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for the next hour on this Democracy Forum debate, where we examine closely global issues of the day. Often we come up with conclusions far apart from the mainstream commentary and media. The horrific Gaza war, how is that impacting Muslim populations in non-Islamic countries? Here in Britain, for example, in last year's election, the now ruling Labour Party lost at least 5 seats in constituencies with large Muslim populations, and reports of anti-Semitism are increasing. And of course, there is that constant fear of a terror attack. And what of elsewhere, of non-Western places like India and Thailand? To drill down further, we have a superb panel of experts, MJ Akbar, Nooralhaq Nasimi, Helen Fenwick. And as always, I ask the president of the Democracy Forum, Lord Charles Bruce, to lay out the background and the canvas of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which will discuss how the war in Gaza is driving the radicalisation of Muslim populations in non-Islamic countries. This is an issue of increasing concern, and I'm particularly grateful that the team at TDF has been able to arrange the event today and invite such a distinguished group of speakers to join the panel, which Humphrey Hawksley has kindly agreed to chair. Following the incursion by Hamas fighters into Israel on the 7th of October 2023, the overwhelming military response of the Israeli Defense Force, the destruction of Gaza and the terrible consequences for the Palestinian people, the security agencies charged with monitoring the prevalence of terrorism in Western countries with significant Muslim populations have sharpened their vigilance about the possibility of contagion. Reporting in October 2024, a year after the outbreak of hostilities in Gaza, the head of the British Security Service, MI5, Ken McCulloch, confirmed that Islamist terrorism accounted for 75% of his agency's counterterrorism caseload, while more than 1/3 of MI5's top priority investigations have some form of connection to organized overseas terrorist groups. Research published by the Soufan Center on the resulting impact of terrorism and political violence emanating from the hostilities in Gaza amplifies the threat of external terrorist actors to the security of Western countries, and quotes from Al-Naba, the official weekly newspaper of ISIS, exhorting, I quote, all Muslims to target the Jewish presence throughout the world, especially Jewish neighborhoods in America and Europe. And prompted by growing evidence of anti-Semitism demonstrated by pro-Palestine marches in cities across Britain, in 2023, the Community Security Trust published data indicating the highest ever level of anti-Jewish hate following the outbreak of hostilities in Gaza. Over the following 2 months after the 7th of October, the Trust recorded 2,699 anti-Semitic incidents compared to 5,204 in the United States. Just over 51%, despite the fact that the British Jewish population is less than 4% of the American Jewish community. And responding to concerns, the marchers were intimidating elected representatives. New guidance was issued to police forces by the Home Office on the 28th of February 2024. Speaking to the press a few days later, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, warned, I quote, "On too many occasions, our streets have been hijacked by small groups who are hostile to our values and have no respect for our democratic traditions." Against this background of heightened tension, it is apparent that three related phenomena are forming attitudes in the West towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. These can be summarized as technology, demography, and ideology. For technology, I'm referring, of course, to the disaggregation of media channels, the influence of unregulated social media, and the resulting disinformation, which exacerbates the polarization and prejudice of key audiences online. A report published by the United Kingdom Prison and Probation Service describes the extent of internet use promoting radicalisation and terrorism as, I quote, "one of the greatest threats that countries, including the United Kingdom, face." And it confirms, furthermore, that 84% of global jihadists are first or second generation European migrants, commonly aged between 8 and 25 years, and where young Muslim men in this cohort are motivated to participate in acts of extremist behavior as a result of being influenced by the use of the internet and social media. Rapid demographic changes driven by immigration and reflected in the growth and changing composition of Muslim populations in Western countries is also a key factor. In Germany, a relatively stable Islamic population of Turkish immigrants has evolved to embrace refugees from Syria, Iraq, and other places, now amounting to over 2 million people. Research published by the Center for Turkish Studies and Integration at the University of Essen explains that recent migrants have, I quote, "brought their views of conflict with them, shaped by a sense of solidarity with the Ummah, the global Muslim community." And equally important in Germany, where the shadow of the Nazi era has shaped the historical certainties of victimhood for over 70 years and has colored Germans' attitudes to Israel and anti-Semitism, the public conscience is now being turned by conflicting ideologies. I quote, "The awareness of the Holocaust is waning," explains Julia Bernstein, Professor of Applied Sciences at Frankfurt University, because, I quote, "Muslims think this is not their history and that they are now the real victims of prejudice." A similar process is taking place in France, home to both the biggest Muslim and Jewish populations in Western Europe, where, I quote, "a conflict of memory exists," writes the political scientist Dominique Moisy, which, I quote, "also harbors contrary strains of anti-Americanism and guilt over colonialism in the Arab world." An accompanying editorial in The Economist magazine could not be blunter. I quote, "From an Israeli point of view, the long-term trajectory of opinion is worrying. In Europe, as the Second World War recedes from living memory and the clout of Muslim voters grows, support for Israel may soften." Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any questions or comments, please pass them to the panel through the chair.
Thank you, Lord Charles Bruce. 84% of global jihadists are first or second generation European migrants, and the long-term trajectory is worrying. First, we go to Delhi and MJ Akbar, newspaperman, author, politician who has written widely on both the collegiality and the chasms between Muslim, Hindu, and other communities. Among his many books, The Shade of Swords, Jihad and the Conflict Between Islam and Christianity, and Gandhi's Hinduism and the Struggle Against Jinnah's Islam. Now, Muslims make up some 15% of India's population. Our debate: the impact of the Gaza war on the radicalisation of Muslim populations in non-Islamic countries. MJ Akbar, give us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. I hope I'm audible. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, MJ.
Right. So thank you very much, Humphrey. I mean, I can understand all the various elements of the subject that we are addressing today. The one thing that worries me a bit is the use of Islamic countries. I know this is a term which has been adapted or adopted by many countries with Muslim populations, but it does not. It actually does a great disservice because it subverts geography in the name of religion. The largest Muslim population in the world is in Indonesia. Is it an Islamic country? It's a secular country. It's a secular country with Hindus with equal rights. Islam lives in a mosque. A mosque is not a nation. And I think until we understand this clearly, it will be very difficult to understand the reactions of Muslims across the world. Muslims, wherever they are nationalists. They belong to the faith, but they are also nationalists of the nation states to which they belong. Humphrey, I'm sure that you have sympathies, for example, with one side or the other in the war between Russia and Ukraine. That does not make it a Christian issue. It makes it a geographical issue of a particular region. Similarly, the problems in Gaza and in the larger Arab world have a geography and a history which belongs to that geography. The history in this particular case emerges from the consequences of the First World War. It's a familiar trope, and this is familiar to anybody who has studied the subject. And it also lends me to believe that while the First World War merged into the Second, and the Second World War ended and merged into the Third World War, which was the Cold War, and the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leading to present confusion. The First World War, in many senses, has not ended. The consequences are still with us. What we are seeing today is a very dangerous situation, a situation which began with terrorism and provocation from one side, but which has now acquired dimensions which are going to have a very long-term impact. Not so much on by creating radicalization in Muslim populations, but by encouraging people within the region to choose other forms of solution apart from the rational route to solution, which is conversation, which is dialogue, which is talks, and which basically is the way in which nation states have decided that they will find a future without war. War is now become endemic to the state, and the reactions that have emerged after Hamas's terrorism have done everything possible, I think, to encourage the view among a large number of Muslims that they must continue and perpetuate this war. This is extremely dangerous. But even if you look in the region, you will find some things which are, I think, worth examining. You talk about radicalization. Where is the radicalization as a consequence of these events, even in Syria? Is the situation in Syria a consequence of the Gaza events, or is it because of an independent series of events that have their origins in different reasons? Where is the radicalization in Egypt? The people really there are still depending on their government to create some form of solution. But what is true is that a framework of disturbance, a framework of discontent has slowly becoming a situation of anger, and that anger is becoming a subdued or sort of volcanic rage. And when that volcano erupts, we cannot really predict what the consequences of that eruption will be. I do not believe at all that this will lead to radicalization of Muslims in India. Why should it? This is a situation, as I said, which has been created by a very different geography and a very different history. Indian Muslims have their own problems. Yes, if you say that there are certain Muslims, that there is sympathy, let us say, for the Palestinians who are getting killed, but much of that sympathy comes from watching children die. I mean, it is the same kind of sympathy that you would have when you watch children die in any context. Nobody wants war to continue. Indonesia is not going to become more radical because of this. Every Muslim in their separate nations will actually behave according to the demands and situations in their nation states. The world is no longer a world of empires. The world has been refashioned, and thank God it has been, from the age of empires after the end of World War and after the decolonization that began with the freedom of India and Indian independence. The world has reordered itself into nation states, and therefore both impulses as well as consequences will take the form of a national reaction. Indian Muslims will be first concerned with the security of India, as they should be. Indonesian Muslims will be first concerned with the security and prosperity of Indonesia, so on for Malaysia. And I tell you, increasingly, even in the Arab world, there is a kind of, instead of radicalization, one might even suggest that there is a sense of fatigue at the continuing hijacking of issues by organizations and by groups that really do not represent the popular will, the popular mind, or the popular aspiration, because regrettably, there is no democracy in these lands. The greatest problem that I see in Muslim countries, not Islamic countries, please, in Muslim countries, is that too many Muslim countries don't have democracy, and therefore do not have governments that reflect not only the will of the people, but the continuing will of the people. In Britain, the will of the people was at one point with the Tories, and now it is with Labour. So people change their minds, as they have every right to, and they get a different government. What we see in so much of the Muslim world is the absence of democracy thwarting the will of the people. Indonesia is a comparative success story. Malaysia is a comparative success story. You know, the largest populations of Muslims are actually in South and Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, Malaysia, and India. And as an Indian Muslim, I'm proud to say, we all have thriving democracies. And therefore, our will is represented in the either in the form of a government, or sometimes, as happens in a democracy, through the opposition parties. But everyone belongs to a democratic system and knows that the democratic system has its ups and downs, but it works. And hence, I don't think you will see radicalization. Radicalization is really an expression of desperation. And countries which have no way in which to express people's will, drive their own populations to desperation. So, on the broader theme of the subject, I do not see any quote unquote radicalization of Muslim populations in non-Islamic countries. I think the Muslims of different parts of the world will continue to react by the circumstances of their own geographies, their own histories, and their own present situations.
Hey, Akbar, thank you very much for that. It's a great way to start the debate by challenging the title, which are a couple of points I would like you to clarify, if you will. You talked about the Ukraine war and that it's a territorial European war, not a Christian war. Where does India stand on the Israel-Palestine and support for India, not support for Israel, not support for Israel? Could you just sum that up for us?
Oh, that's very easily done, because we support the existence of two states, right? And we believe that both states should coexist. We do not support war as in any form whatsoever. And we both encourage the world's powers that have a stake in that region, or let's say have an influence in the region. We ask them, we plead with them not to encourage war, but to bring at least the rational elements within those countries to a conversation table.
And
so we would support the Qatar, the Doha talks, or any other forms, or any other mechanisms for a peaceful solution.
And your argument in recent history does play out, because am I right in this? The war on terror, Iraq, Afghanistan, all those things, that did not radicalize the Muslim population in India. Is that correct? But I wonder.
Humphrey, why do you call it the war on terror?
Because the Americans called it the war on terror.
So, I mean,
yes, I'm just calling it what it was generally called.
That is precisely the problem, that we should not have called it the war on terror, because in fact, terrorism was an outcome of the war rather than a reason for that.
Or as you say, the outcome of what led on from the First World War issues not being resolved. But before I let you go, one is that you mentioned this very good point about Muslim countries not having democracy. But as Lord Bruce said, 84% of the radicalized global jihadists are first or generation Europeans, i.e. they have been raised within a democracy. Can you square that circle?
I think while I would hate to be the Pythagoras of this conversation, but the thing is, I don't think that many of these quote unquote immigrants who have come to Europe still belong to the countries they have adopted. Their minds are still in the countries of their origin.
Right.
And, and it will take time. It will take 2 generations maybe before they actually belong to the Europe that has become a temporary sanctuary for them.
Yes. So in that case, what you've got is a situation that's typical amongst many diaspora, in that their view is more extreme than the view of the communities in the country that have to deal with the transport and the schooling and the health and everything, whereas they have the luxury to think in a more extremist way. Can I give you a question from Mohammed Ismail, one of our audience? Are matters made worse over the Gaza war because many Muslims already feel marginalized in their non-Islamic countries? Would greater social integration help? You have addressed it. Just talk about that again.
Yeah, well, first, once again, what is a non-Islamic society and Islamic society? Let's keep Islam into the mosque, and a mosque is not a nation, right? A church is not a nation, right? A Roman Catholic Pope is not the head of a nation; he's the head of a church. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. But yes, the other part of the question, that will they be radicalized? I don't think that this will lead to radicalization because, and I say this with great pain, far worse has happened in that region. You mentioned Iraq itself.
Yeah.
You know, we don't know the number of casualties of Iraq. Nobody knows. I mean, all sorts of figures keep floating around, right? And that actually, it's a miracle that there has been some form of a resolution
So
to the situation in Iraq that consists today. Because believe me, and I know lots of people don't seem to think this to be true, but 90% of the Muslims are as rational as anyone else and as concerned about the necessities of life, about getting a better future for their children, about getting a better life for themselves. That, you know, within the years given to us by God, if you believe in God, or given to us by nature, if you think nature is God, then we want a better life in it. And that's what they want. 10% cannot hijack the world's Muslims.
Thank you, MJ Akbar, very much for that. Stay with us for as long as you can. I do know that you have to leave early. We might come back to you. Next, though, we have Dr. Nooralhaq Nasimi, the founder and director of the Afghanistan and Central Asian Association. That is a critical geographical area for radicalization, as we just heard. The Taliban, after all, hosted al-Qaeda, which led to this war on terror, as the Americans call it, and a lurch towards extremism. What has been the impact on refugees here in the United Kingdom, which, as the title of our debate says, regardless of what MJ Akbar is arguing, but I think is a non-Islamic country, is a non-Muslim country. Nooralhaq Nasimi, give us your view from the front line.
First of all, I completely agree with Mr. Akbar when he said terrorism is a very big concern for the entire world. And I would like to say that the increased number of terrorist activities started actually after the USSR invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. At the same time, when we see what's going on, what was happening since 1979 in non-Muslim countries, we have witnessed the attack on Twin Tower in United States in 2001, which resulted the NATO intervention on Afghanistan, the attack in Paris, in London Bridge, as well as in some other non-Muslim countries. And what we are looking and seeing on a grassroots level here in the United Kingdom, of course, the war in Palestine as well as in Libya and Syria seriously impacted the situation among the diaspora community. When we see millions of people on the London street in support of people in Palestine, it is an indication how the war in Gaza sometimes contributed among non-Muslim community to convert into Muslim Islam. During the Ramadan, we saw thousands of people attended iftar at Trafalgar Square. Most of them, they are from non-Muslim country, and they converted to Islam. So Islam is, in reality, is a very good religion. But the problem, what is happening in Ukraine, when the Russian killing thousands in Ukraine, when the USSR invaded Afghanistan and killed millions of people in Afghanistan, of course, it affects the increased number of, I agree with Mr. Akbar that instead of using the term radicalization, we can just use the term increased Muslims in non-Muslim countries rather than radicalization. As we can see here in the United Kingdom, people from different faith, different culture, they are living together in peace. They love each other, they respect each other, and they work as a team here in the United Kingdom. But how we can prevent radicalization in our society, this is something that the government is responsible to allocate more resources to the grassroots organization. It is the responsibility of the government how they can work in partnership with the grassroots organizations to make sure that we will continue building a safer and peaceful society for different faith and for different people in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could just follow up on your last point there in a way, because you work very closely with mainly Afghan refugees that come into the UK. How many are at risk or have been radicalized that you know of, and why?
So this is again, when you see the attitude of the Taliban in Afghanistan, promoting anti-Western sentiment among the diaspora community. Of course, when we talk about the Taliban, it doesn't mean that the Taliban only in control of Afghanistan. The Taliban, they are having a big network, including in the United Kingdom. Until today, we don't know how many members of the Taliban used the opportunity in 2021 when the Western country helped thousands of people to evacuate them from Afghanistan because of the return of the Taliban.
And how do you and your colleagues prevent this radicalization? How do you talk to the refugees to set them on a different track?
We believe on promoting integration and British values. They are very, very important for organizations like us to make sure that people understand the system, understand the language, understand how to navigate, how to participate in a community life, how to improve their integration into the mainstream services. Most of the issues affected by radicalization is because of the language barriers. This is because of isolation.
Okay, and does this work?
Poverty. Some people, they are unemployed. Some people, they don't have the money to buy food. Some people, they don't have housing. They are sleeping on the street. So that's why we believe on supporting people on a grassroots level, as well as asking the government to support the local grassroots organization.
I just wanted to bring back MJ Akbar, if you're still there, MJ, on this point. Yes. In that you have these refugees coming in, say from Afghanistan, who are in a Western society as refugees. how does what we've just heard there from Nooralhaq Nasimi differ from the radicalisation attempts within India, where people are not refugees, but they might be poor and they might be discriminated or feel discriminated against? Is it a different experience?
In India, if Indian Muslims have a problem, or if Indian communities, there are a vast number of Indian communities, there are identities in India which are regional, which are southern, which are Tamil, and so on and so forth. So the India has a vast number of electoral identities. And if people feel sense of frustration with a particular government, they know all that they have to do is wait for an election.
So an Afghan refugee in India has got a better chance of not being radicalized than one in the UK?
I think, you have to come to see the integration of Afghan refugees in India for yourself.
Yeah, well, yes,
and it's quite remarkable. Because they feel a sense, but there's also, I must say, apart from anything else, there's a sense of cultural association.
Yes.
I mean, which is, they culturally, we are not that distant as Britain is from Afghanistan. But one thing we must remember about refugees, that refugees don't go to another country of their free will. They have been forced by circumstances to go elsewhere and to seek sanctuary, or to seek economic refuge, perhaps, to seek political refuge, perhaps, to seek refuge from death, perhaps. So they are not there because they wanted to be there. They are there because they are forced to be there. And this much of sympathy we must be able to show as human beings for their plight.
And I'm just trying, Nooralhaq Nasimi, would it be better then if, instead of coming here, as far as this radicalization issue is concerned, that the refugees from Afghanistan went to places that were more culturally, that they're culturally closer to, like to India?
I think one of the main reasons for people from Afghanistan and other conflict states coming to United Kingdom and putting their life in risk is just because the way of life in the UK is different than any other countries in the world. The rule of law, democracy, human rights, the opportunities available in the UK than comparing to any other countries in the world. So one of the main reasons attracting millions of people across the world to come to the United Kingdom is because of those opportunities. But then they do not have respect.
Dr. Nasimi, if I may interrupt before I have to leave, I am a Muslim, right? I am an Indian, right? Very happy to be. I have absolutely no desire to go to Britain to seek my refuge there, right? And there are no Indian Muslims seeking refuge from India and going elsewhere, right? If they are going anywhere, it is for, if they do go anywhere, it's for jobs, as Hindus go to the Gulf, right? So please do not try to find answers from the experience of nations and peoples who, I'm sorry to say, you do not fully understand. And I think it might be wiser to suggest to Humphrey that the reason that they come to Britain is because the British are still generous in their welcome.
MJ, we will leave it on that point. Thank you both very much for that impromptu back and forth, because we are now going to our final panelist, Professor Helen Fenwick, who's Professor of Human Rights and Law at Durham University with a speciality in counterterrorism, and has written widely and is a general editor of Judicial Review, as well as being a consultant to the Doughty Chambers, that is a law firm steeped in these issues that we're talking at. How are governments and citizens responding to this groundswell of support for the Palestinians? Helen Fenwick, tell us what you know.
Very much for that introduction. Okay, so I want to look at particular ways that the type of radicalization that we're talking about, assuming that some individuals are radicalized, might manifest itself and possible legal consequences, using the UK as a case study, but the experiences could well be replicated in other non-Muslim states. Obviously, radicalization isn't a clear-cut concept. It could be taken to denote strong, sustained allegiance to extremist views. That's been defined by the UK government as entailing vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, stated to include a commitment to democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. Holding such views, so supposedly views pertaining to anti-British values, wouldn't lead to state interventions, but the term radicalisation could be taken to imply that the person concerned is likely to express the convictions which are the basis of that state in some way. On that note, a key point is that Hamas is a prescribed group in the UK and in some other states. So expressions of support can fall within the range of offences that apply to showing support for prescribed groups, which don't apply if support is shown for a group that can fall within the definition of terrorism, but isn't prescribed. So if a Muslims become radicalized due to the conflict in Gaza, but as part of such radicalization is not a supporter of Hamas, that person could express their radicalization in various ways that still might lead to imposition of certain counter-terror measures that I'll mention in a moment, but their actions wouldn't fall within the ambit of prescription-related offences. But if such radicalisation led to supporting Hamas and was manifested in certain ways, such offences could apply. Prescription-related offences under the Terrorism Act 2000 include being a member of, inviting support for, or arranging meetings for a prescribed organisation, as well as displaying or publishing images that arouse suspicion of such membership or support. So, for example, taking part in a pro-Palestine march, as of course is occurring very frequently, especially in London, wouldn't in itself mean that one of those offences was being committed. But displaying images online or offline showing support for Hamas by, for example, going on a march wearing depictions associated with the group or the October 7 attacks could lead to prosecutions. Showing support for Hamas perhaps due to radicalization in other settings could lead to different interventions aside from prosecution. And I'll turn to one such means of intervention. Prevent in the UK is an anti-radicalisation programme. The idea behind it is that it allows for early intervention if a person shows signs of becoming radicalised, which could apply in the example of a Muslim in the UK expressing in some way support for Palestinians, which appears to include support for Hamas, for example, as a school pupil. The Prevent strategy reflects the increasing emphasis in domestic and international counterterrorism efforts on early intervention, including as to the desirability of addressing extremism as part of the initial phase of radicalization, or rather deemed to be. That emphasis formed the background to the placement of the Prevent duty on a statutory basis in 2015 in the Counterterrorism Security Act Part 5 and influenced the accompanying guidance. The duty under Part 5 requires specified authorities in the UK, which includes private and state sector schools, to have due regard to the need to prevent people from being drawn into terrorism. If, for example, a school pupil is referred to the Prevent team and it's determined that the referral is upheld, they can't be forced to go on a de-radicalisation programme, but the fact of the referral is recorded. Conceivably, a referral in relation to the Gaza conflict could mean that a prosecution is later brought for supporting a prescribed group, Hamas, but Prevent is not a programme directly concerned with criminal investigations. Prevent may be having an impact on Muslim school pupils. Evidence from some teachers in the UK indicates that the impact of the conflict on communities in Gaza and the wider region is being felt deeply by a number of their pupils, and some teachers have said that their students are self-censoring in the classroom on Gaza, out of fear of being labelled extremist by the Prevent programme. There are claims that pupils who wear pro-Palestinian badges and stickers to school are being referred to the Prevent programme or are being considered for referral. Claims of self-censorship by Muslim pupils in relation to the Gaza conflict have received some support from certain human rights monitoring bodies, some Muslim civil society groups, some academic comment. Such opponents of the Prevent strategy have drawn upon such criticisms to argue that Prevent normalizes Islamophobia and is akin to a totalitarian measure intended to monitor Muslim pupils for ideological compliance with British values. In contrast, proponents of Prevent claim that the impact of the strategy on free speech in schools is exaggerated by its critics, and they dispute the characterization of Prevent as a strategy targeted at Muslim pupils generally, referring to recent government figures which suggest that a relatively small number of individuals are affected by the policy, of which an increasing number have far-right rather than Islamic links. This is clearly an extremely sensitive subject, especially for pupils and teachers. Teachers need to steer a path between determining that particular expressions of support for Palestinians do or do not necessarily entail expressions of support for Hamas. They also need to determine whether a pupil is being radicalized due to the conflict, or alternatively, whether they're seeking to explore its nature and their own feelings in relation to it. A further counter-terror program, which is linked to criminal investigations, but is also designed as an early intervention counter-terror measure, started life in the form of control orders. Measures on the control orders model are preventive counter-terror measures that can be imposed on a terrorist suspect without a criminal trial. Such measures are imposed on the basis of reasonable suspicion as to the suspect's involvement in terrorism, which could include that an assessment has been made that they've been radicalized due to the Gaza conflict. That assessment might be made, for example, if they've contacted others online in relation to the conflict and expressed views that could indicate an intention to engage in a potentially terrorist conspiracy or preparatory act. If such suspicion is found, then various restrictions can be imposed on the suspect, which include periods of house arrest, preventing them associating with certain others, and imposing forced relocation to another part of the UK on them. The imposition of the order can be challenged in court, but it's imposed, as I mentioned, without a criminal trial. The idea is to restrict the suspect's movements and activities with a view to hindering their ability to engage in terrorist activity in the UK. Control orders were replaced in 2011 by terrorism prevention and investigation measures, TPIMs. But although they replaced control orders, they're on the same model. TPIMs were intended in 2011 to be softened control orders, less repressive measures. But since then, TPIMs have been re-strengthened, especially under the Counterterrorism and Sentencing Act 2021. In their strengthened form, they now quite closely resemble the original control orders in terms of being almost equally repressive. TPIMs now have a small but established preventive role as part of the counter-terror arsenal. Measures on this model, originating in the UK, have now spread to other EU states, as Amnesty detailed in a highly critical 2017 report. Nevertheless, there has been constraint in their use. Only a very small number of suspects have been and are subjected to them, partly due to the constraining impact of the European Convention on Human Rights under the Human Rights Act. The possibility of expensive litigation based on the convention appears to have affected security service, governmental and judicial decisions as to deployment of these executive measures. So in the example I gave of the suspect who appears, partly due to their online activity, to have been radicalized due to the conflict in Gaza, decisions would have to be made as to whether to seek a prosecution, impose a TPIM, or just to keep the suspect under surveillance, or possibly deem them to be low risk and therefore as needing no further action. So in conclusion, the measures I've considered as potential responses to radicalization of some Muslims in a non-Muslim state due to the Gaza conflict risk, I suggest, creating a chilling effect on debate and information about the conflict, arguably out of proportion to possible security benefits. For example, the extent of the allegiance of Palestinians to Hamas is a matter of controversy on which information is sparse, since Hamas does not welcome vocalized opposition. Debate and information as to Israel's long-term objectives is also clearly needed, since opinions are sharply divided on that matter. Reform and possibly abolition of certain of the provisions I've discussed may be needed in order to avoid such a chilling effect on providing information and debate about the conflict, which in itself, I would argue, could be linked to fostering radicalization. Thank you.
Helen Fenwick, thank you very much for that. Can I just clarify the raft of measures and laws that you gave us there? And thank you for that. Has there any new ones, or are there any new ones coming in precisely because of the reaction to the Gaza war?
As to my knowledge, no, I'm not aware that anything specific has been proposed. There are certain new public order measures. They're not specifically counter-terror measures, of course, but they seem to be aimed at the marches that have taken place in a number of places, including London. Right. So some public order provisions seem to have a link, but not counter-terror provisions, not new counter-terror provisions. Because obviously there's all, sorry, go on.
No. So the ones you mentioned, 2011, they've been from the war on terror, say from the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, which sort of produced this trend. This has been a steady bringing in of various measures, but nothing since 2023 and October 2023 that have. And your very interesting point about free speech, I suppose this is what it is. Have there been people sort of had the knock on the door from the police because of their involvement in the, or what they said about the Gaza, like we've heard other people getting knocks on door because of various things they've said on social media?
Yes, there have. I mean, I'll give one example as part of a march, which you may have heard of, where two women were wearing symbols showing paragliders coming in on October the 7th. Well, they showed a picture of paragliders.
Yes, I remember
Therefore,
that.
Yeah, exactly. I think it was reported on quite a lot. They were arrested and, well, actually, I think they gave themselves up in the end. But in any event, they were subject to charge in relation to support for Hamas, which I mentioned, obviously, as a prescribed group. And because they showed that particular image, which was on what they wore at a march, that led to their prosecution, which was in fact successful. They didn't face, as far as I remember, they didn't face a custodial sentence, but they did receive, they were found liable for the offence in question. So that's the kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, and to address the direct title of the debate, the impact of the Gaza war on the radicalisation, would people become more radicalized because of the Gaza war or because of the restrictions that are being used against them on free speech and what they do?
I think it would be really difficult to say in any one particular case whether or not which was the most, greater sort of factor in terms of leading to radicalization. I think I would argue that the use of controllers, now TPIMs, and some of the impact on prevent may have had an effect in terms of radicalization, yes. But I would say that, of course, in some instances, it wouldn't necessarily be measures like this. It could be the effect of, it could be images coming from Gaza. So, yeah, I don't think there is any research I'm aware of where one could prove that one had a greater radicalizing impact than the other.
One word. I'd like to bring in, I think we've lost MJ Akbar, but to bring in Nooralhaq Nasimi just for a couple of questions from the audience, which you can both address. Margaret Berry asks, when even non-Muslims in the West and elsewhere see Gaza war not just as a regional issue, but as an affront to humanity, should we not see this as a crisis that goes beyond both faith and geography? Can you just both give a very quick answer to that? Because I've got another one from Philip Bone about social media. And Nooralhaq Nasimi.
Yes, please.
Is this an affront to humanity?
Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, Margaret Berry asks, even non-Muslims in the West and elsewhere see Gaza war not just as a regional issue, but as an affront to humanity, should we not see not as a crisis that goes beyond both faith and geography? Like, it's a universal crisis that needs to be addressed. And I guess she's talking about on human rights issues there. What's your view?
I think she's right, yes. The issues on the human rights violation is unreported worldwide. For example, the British public, sometimes they are not aware of what's going on in Afghanistan and why the number of refugees from Afghanistan increased for the past few years after the return of the Taliban.
So you're saying this is a sort of global or a universal human rights issue against Muslim populations, which the Palestinians are. Helen Fenwick, do you agree with that?
Well, the question was about whether it could be seen as a general affront to humanity, therefore going beyond the actual conflict. I would have to examine evidence as to exactly, what particular claims are being made. Obviously, I'm well aware of what's happened and the number of people who've been killed. Obviously, there are certain there are international norms as to, what amounts to a war crime, for example. Yeah. If civilians are deliberately targeted, then, they're clearly targeted without any question of trying to actually hit a military target. That can amount to a war crime. So if there is clear evidence of war crimes committed by either side, then one would accept that would be an affront to humanity,
which the International Criminal Court has decided has happened. A final one and a summing up, please, from each of you. Philip Bowman asks, what role can social media companies play in ensuring their platforms are not used to spread extremist propaganda from either side, even as they allow for fair discussion about the war in Gaza? A tricky one. Nooralhaq Nasimi, social media companies, what should they do?
I think the Australian government, they made a very serious measure to stop young people using the social media. Maybe this is something that we here in the United Kingdom, we must follow the Australian government, what they have done so far. The social media can maybe create more tension between different communities, between different faiths. If we do not take any serious measure in the near future. Today, for example, most of the young people, they have an iPhone, they have a mobile, they are having access to social media, and they are easily can be misled by some of the terrorist organizations.
Sorry to interrupt, because we're running out of time. You advocate the control of social media. Helen Fenwick?
Well, we've got various initiatives, including in the UK, for regulation of social media. In other words, a top-down regulator in the UK, it's Ofcom. It would be meant to intervene if certain standards, we've got what's called the Online Safety Act, which is certainly targets terrorist propaganda online. And the question is, if it's enforced, it could be a means of cleansing the internet, at least to some extent, of such terrorist propaganda. So it's a question of enforcement. We do have regulation in place in the UK and in other countries, but whether it will be enforced will be another matter.
Ofcom needs to regulate it. Thank you so much. We are out of time. Thank you for the audiences for those questions that took us slightly over time. And thank you, Helen Fenwick, Nooralhaq Nasimi, and MJ Akbar, who had to leave us for the next few months. We are now holding these debates twice a month. And in June and September, we plan to hold streamed and in-person debates, Democracy Forum debates at a central London venue. The next stream debate is April the 23rd at 2 p.m. London time. Can democracy survive in the changing world order amid the US America First policy? Now, that's a question for us all. Please tune in then. Very much hope to see you. And for now, from me, Humphrey Hawksley, and all at the Democracy Forum, goodbye.
Thank you very much.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.